I want to talk about two common obstacles to creativity: protection and projection. Now let's start with protection. Protection is something that we're pretty accustomed to. I think the best phrase that would sum it up is writer's block. So if you're in this sort of protection mode, here's what tends to happen. And we can generalize writer's block to any other creative pursuit. It could be dancing, writing, producing music. At some point you're attempting to get something done and you just can't even start. You're trying to write words on the page and nothing's coming out. You're trying to write a new song and you're just feeling completely blocked and completely stuck. Now at the root of this obstacle is what I'm calling protection. And protection is, I am afraid to put myself out there for fear of being judged, for fear of the work not being good, for fear of what I'll think about myself if this song doesn't come out the way that I want it to be. And so we don't start primarily because we're afraid of how things will be after we start. Of course, you know how to type, write, play the piano, whatever it is. You're hesitating and you're hesitant because you're worried about what it will mean if the thing that you create is not great. It's not good. It's not up to your standard. It's not up to this perceived standard that you have in your head about how things should look. And so I call it protection because it's not really about whether or not you're able to perform that skill. You, of course, are able to fulfill that skill. It's more about this inner dialogue that you're having with yourself that says, I'm not good enough, that says it should sound a certain way, that says that I have to create this in the way that I normally have. It has to be, a chapter that is structured like this. It can't be poetry. It can't be a rock song if I'm a jazz musician. All of these sort of internal obligations and pressures are keeping us hesitant from putting ourselves out there. And I'll discuss this protection mode a little bit more in a bit, but I want to talk about the second form of obstacle that occurs in our creative life, and that's projection. And I don't think many people talk about the idea of projection. So let me break this down. So projection is not being blocked from creating. In fact, you're fully able to create. You're able to record a video like this. You're able to write. You're able to produce music. But in the projection mode, the creation that you're making is one of a few things. It's trying too hard because you want to impress other people. It's trying too hard because you're trying to impress yourself. You're doing something to get a certain type of reaction or a certain type of result. And you're not in the natural creative process, but instead you're in a creative process that is functioning to get some other ends. You're trying to create a song specifically so that you feel like you're not blocked and that you can prove it to the world that you are a creative person or that you can do X, Y, and Z. And the problem with this sort of projection, this proving, this I'm sort of trying to force a creation into being instead of being stuck. We have the opposite where we're actually forcing things into being. What tends to happen is, although we created, and that's great, you wrote the thing, you wrote the song, the problem is the magic and the natural ability that you really have also doesn't show up in that piece. And so we know that the best art sort of splits in between those two. It's not trying to prove your value. You're not trying to force people to understand your music or to like what you're doing. You're also not trying to hide and protect yourself from being vulnerable by putting yourself in the work. Instead, the best creation comes right in the middle, where you're creating without anything to prove, but you're also not hiding from showing up and sharing the gifts that you really have that can make this work great. So on one hand, we have this protective narrative that is saying, if I put myself into this work, or if I do something that messes up, something bad will happen. We're trying to protect ourselves so we don't show up. We get blocked, we can't write. On the other side, we have this projection narrative, which is, won't they like this song if I put this in it? Won't they give me respect if this happens? And in that case, you're doing it not for the purity of the work, but to manipulate the audience around you. And I think that when people react to the work that you create, they can tell. They can tell that you're trying to manipulate them into feeling a certain way. Now, you can make people feel a certain way. You can invite them in to feel emotion. You can get accolades and success and rewards of creating something beautiful, but that only happens when you're splitting that gap and you're just showing up naturally and you're showing up fully and you're not hiding, but you're also not trying to convince anybody. This is the natural form of sort of artistic and creative ability that we want to develop and be able to do on demand as frequently as possible. But I think being aware of the reasons why we get stuck and why we show up and we feel off, or something's not working because we can't create, or something's not working because we're creating all the time but nobody's getting it, nobody's responding. That's why it's important to be aware of whether or not you're protecting yourself or you're projecting. So how do we get around these two obstacles? How do we get back to that more natural space where we're able to create without being concerned about what others are thinking, and we're not concerned about the mental chatter that's keeping us from actually creating anything? And the best way to get around both of those is to give them the space they need. First, become aware. I'm not writing right now because I'm concerned that if the words don't show up like they did yesterday, I'm not a creative person, or I'm not a good writer, or whatever kind of shame thinking we have. Recognize that that's what's playing out. It's not true. It's, oh, I'm worried that if I don't do it perfect, I'm putting this self-imposed obligation that if it doesn't go a certain way, then I'm not worthy. So understanding that that's just the narrative that's happening, I think, is very helpful in giving it the space that's needed to pull it apart and say, that's not true. And if I think about it, I've written stuff for the past, however long, and so that it's not like I just lost my ability to write or create. That magic doesn't go away. It's still there. It's just now we're trying to force it into existence and we're too scared to step into it because we're worried that it won't be there. And that's all an internal narrative that we need to give some space, laugh at it, remember the truth, which is that you have the same ability that you had yesterday. There's no reason for that not to be the case. And then we can re-engage knowing that it's okay if it's not perfect, and it's okay if it's not the way I thought it would look, and maybe it's even better. I'm really blocked from writing this chapter in my book today. Maybe I should do a poem. Maybe I should completely change how I do this and free myself from this form that I've tried to keep myself constricted into. There's actually a lot of innovation that happens in art when that's the thing that happens. Now, on the projection side, it's more about how you're thinking you're going to seem to other people. So when we're sort of projecting this art onto other people, we're making last-minute edits, not to make it received better, which is a great thing to do, not to make it emotionally connect more, which of course we want to add, but we're trying to manipulate somebody into feeling the way, liking us, giving us respect, whatever it is. And that's the thing that people pick up on. So you have to ask yourself, what am I doing that's extra, that's unnecessary, that's purely for my own gain of my ego feeling better about this work, not what actually serves the purpose of this work that I'm creating? And if we can isolate that projection and ask ourselves that, we can laugh and see, oh yeah, I added that paragraph because I wanted them to think that I was smart. Or I created this section in the video because I wanted them to think that I knew what I was talking about. So if we can learn those two skills, if we can ask those questions of ourselves, I think you'll find that middle path a lot easier to discover when it is that you're creating. So if you have any ideas about this, if you have any responses you want to share, if you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. And with that, I'll be back again soon with another video.